You're listening to Holding Hope, a podcast series from Growing Hope.
Hello and welcome to our Holding Hope podcast, Unswerving and Wide-Reaching. We're focusing on the passage in Hebrews 10:23, which says, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful." And we'd love to talk about Holding Hope and Jubilee Plus with Natalie today. Natalie grew up in relative poverty in Hastings, one of the most deprived towns in England, and she put her faith in Jesus at 15, but for a long time struggled with this feeling of not fitting in church because of her background. And today she is the chief executive of the brilliant charity Jubilee Plus, which equips churches to embed mercy and justice in their DNA and to change the lives of people who are experiencing poverty. Natalie speaks and writes books on mercy, poverty and class, and it's just great to have her with us this morning. She brings loads to the table. So Natalie, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and what hope means to you?
Thank you, Naomi. Great to be with you. And in terms of me, growing up in relative poverty, I grew up when I was a kid. We lived on the 16th floor of a block of council flats. We didn't have any central heating. And when I say that to young people, they just look at me like, oh, that's just because you're so old that heating didn't exist back in your day. But I'm not that old.
Yeah.
Heating did exist, and so I had free school meals, and to be honest, I wasn't really aware that I was in poverty because everyone around me was in the same situation. But I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional family, touched by all sorts of things that you don't really want to experience in your childhood. The death of a sibling, my brother died when I was 3 years old. There was domestic abuse in my home. There was debt, disability, adultery, like just all sorts of things, and it was very, very dysfunctional. And I think in my adulthood, I've looked back and realised, gosh, the odds were so stacked against me. And I think that's something that when you're a kid in that situation, you're not really thinking like that. But as an adult, I've been like, wow, gosh. When I first became a Christian at 15, I only went to church because I liked a boy. I wasn't looking for Jesus. I wasn't looking for anything spiritual. And if I'd known what becoming a Christian involved in terms of the cost, I probably would have never done it. But wonderfully and mercifully, Jesus grabbed hold of me at 15. It was a very rocky road for certainly at least my first 10 years as a Christian. Not without its trouble. I went off the rails after becoming a Christian more so. The first thing that changed for me when I became a Christian, obviously other than all the spiritual stuff that changes, was to do with hope. So I didn't realise how my whole life felt like it was only headed in one direction. Like, it just felt like there was one path and it was set for me. And it's not like I was consciously thinking that as a 15-year-old. But I remember when I became a Christian, a teacher who was an atheist said to me, "I'm really sad for you. You've become a Christian because it's going to now narrow your whole world." And actually, what has happened for me is the absolute opposite. It's like my whole world, it didn't just broaden my horizons. It's like it blew open everything. Suddenly I realized I've got options for my life, and I didn't know that was even a thing, that people could make choices. That sounds a bit weird, but I genuinely didn't get, I don't have to just follow this set path. Like, there's multiple paths available. Yeah. I had no clue that my life could have any impact on anyone else's, to be honest, for good or bad.
Yeah.
I just was in my own little world, my own little bubble, and when I became a Christian, my aspirations, like my gaze was lifted, and suddenly I had this hope. And if I'm honest, actually, it was a bit unsettling because I didn't really know what to do with it. But so hope for me is kind of that just blowing up of opportunities, blowing up of worldview, blowing up of appreciation for other people, the value of a single individual life, whether that's mine or other people's. So that was when hope came in, really, when I was 15.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think there's so much in that, isn't there, of like, you know, often, so at Growing Hope, what we do is we champion accessibility and provide free therapy for kids with additional needs in partnership with churches across the UK. And we find so many families are experiencing high levels of poverty, often in a kind of way that you have described, like have a very small network, don't have many opportunities often ahead of them. And one of our values is around community, like around enabling people to be seen, heard, and able to belong. And I think that can be a big bit of hope for people, of discovering, actually, I can belong, like I can be seen, I can have a place to play. And like you say, it's interesting because sometimes I guess that can feel a bit scary because the world is then more open in a way that it might not have been before.
Yeah, definitely.
And can you tell us a bit more about your journey yourself?
So for the next 10 years after I became a Christian, I really struggled in church because being from not only a background of poverty, but also a working class background, I felt like people like me don't really fit in church. I couldn't really see anyone who seemed to have any life experiences like mine. That actually wasn't true. It's just my perception was that all these people go on fancy holidays and they all have savings in the bank and they all own their own homes and all this stuff that I just thought was totally inaccessible to me. Now, I actually have got a degree in stuff now, partly because of my aspirations changing when I became a Christian. But I just found church super hard. And I kind of then felt like, well, if I can't fit in church, it must mean God doesn't want me. It must mean that he doesn't want people like me. And so then I felt really kind of rejected and went massively off the rails, got into drugs and just, kind of threw myself into boys' drugs, or stuff that was really unhelpful. And outwardly, it probably looked like I was having a whale of a time, like really enjoying myself. But actually, I was really struggling with depression. And I was diagnosed with depression. At one point, I was taking antidepressants, tranquilizers during the day, sleeping pills at night. And I felt like I was just on this cocktail of drugs. I was seeing a counselor, then a psychiatrist, and nothing was helping. I was self-harming quite a lot. I didn't know then that I have ADHD. So that's a recent diagnosis. And looking back, it just makes so much sense of so much of my life. But I didn't know that. And so I really just massively went off the rails. And to be honest with you, really reached rock bottom. And it was only when I reached rock bottom and was seriously contemplating ending my life that I basically said to Jesus, if you don't break in the next 7 days, I can't keep going. Like, I don't know what to do. I also don't really have a lot of life skills. So I didn't know how to handle money. I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know how to manage my diary. There's just a whole load of stuff I wasn't equipped with. And so basically I reached that crunch point. And then on day 6, when I'd given God this 7-day ultimatum, on day 6, he really came through for me. And I met this Christian, and I knew as soon as I met her that she was going to help me come back to God and was going to help me. And it wasn't all smooth sailing from then either, but the last 20 years of my Christian life has been completely different to the first 10 years. I still feel like I don't fit in church, but now I realize that God chooses a whole load of people who don't fit in church, and he puts us all together and tells us to love each other. And that's the world will know that we belong to Jesus by a whole bunch of people who shouldn't love each other, actually loving each other.
Yeah, amazing. And that's what makes the world, the church so great, isn't it? Like, the body being different, I think, brings so many different gifts and skills and kingdom things that we otherwise wouldn't have if we were all exactly the same. Can you tell us a bit, being Growing Hope and wanting to understand more about accessibility and additional needs for people, like, what does your ADHD diagnosis mean to you?
It's been really, really helpful. So I was only actually diagnosed a year ago, and I already had been told by people around me that they thought I had ADHD, which came as a shock to me a few years ago, but I'd got used to the idea. But I wasn't expecting the autistic part of the diagnosis. And so it was really interesting, even seeing how I reacted. I was actually a bit upset, and I thought, why am I upset? Why am I reacting like that? And it made me really think, what's my perception of autism that I feel I was okay to have an ADHD diagnosis, but I'm not okay with the autistic part. But since I got the diagnosis a year ago, it's just been so helpful. I now look at so many ways that I struggle in certain settings, or certain things like being in big social settings makes me just feel absolutely exhausted. But I'm an external processor and I'm quite sociable. So I didn't really get, why do I always feel so tired after stuff like that? Why do I always feel like I'm in a fight with my brain? That was part of it. And I'm not sure I would have used that language a year ago, but now it's given me language to understand myself.
Yeah.
But it's also been massively helpful for me with my team at Jubilee Plus, and helpful for them, but also helpful for me realizing that someone who's neurotypical is never going to work the way I do. And just as they've got to learn to kind of work with me with neurodiversity, I've got to learn to work with them. And can't try and change each other. We've just got to find ways to kind of appreciate each other's strengths and cover each other's weaknesses. And so I'm actually having ADHD coaching at the moment, which is really, really helping me to be kinder to myself. So my ADHD coach said to me, you've talked a lot about I never get things done ahead of time. I never stick to a plan. I've been working on a book and just have found it super stressful the way I've worked on it. And it was amazing. This was like a revelation to me because he just said, what if you just stopped saying all that and instead saw yourself as someone who gets stuff done? And he pointed out to me, you've written books, you've grown Jubilee Plus. I mean, by God's grace, but Jubilee Plus has grown in the 5 years I've been leading it. We've gone from like 3 staff to 10 and just, it's been quite a big and significant expansion. And he's like, and you turn up places and you speak when you're asked to, and you write articles when you're asked to. And so he just pointed out to me that I'm someone who gets stuff done. And I was just like, oh my goodness, that feels just utterly transformative to have that kind of kinder assessment of myself. But also with the autistic diagnosis, there's just things that I just thought like that I didn't like, or were just personal preference, or that I needed to get over. And now knowing that I've got that diagnosis, it means I'm much more able to communicate. So if I'll give you an example, a friend of mine, her husband died a couple of years ago. And obviously, she's utterly grief-stricken. He was in his early 50s, friends with us. We're all grief-stricken. And I would go out to see my friend, and she would insist on me stroking her dog, and I wouldn't be able to do it. And because I didn't have a diagnosis, I just thought, what's wrong with me that my friend's lost her husband and I just can't stroke this dog? But everything within me would tense up, and I'd feel this sort of dread and fear of touching this dog. And so I'd say to her, I'm really sorry I can't, but I wouldn't know why I couldn't. And so I think she was really upset about it. She's like, just stroke her. Like, but now I've been able to say to her, actually, it's part of my autism, that the idea of the texture, the feel of it really actually distresses me. And so I think she's been able to recognize that it's not me just being selfish or unkind or lacking compassion for her. I felt awful about it for months, but now we're able to have that conversation and she's able to understand it's not really a choice. It's not like I'm just going, no, I don't want to. It's that it would actually cause me quite a lot of distress and discomfort. And it helped me to understand, actually, this isn't just me making a choice. This is something that's really affecting me as well. And there's a reason behind it. So I found that sort of thing really, really helpful.
So that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing, Natalie. And I think what you said about your team being able to learn, and you being able to learn, and being able to understand more of yourself, and all of those things are part of this picture of that we often think about in terms of community, of like being able to be seen and heard and able to belong. I think part of what we want to be championing at Growing Hope is really seeing the people that God's created them to be, and knowing that hope that He speaks over them in any situation, any circumstance, whatever that looks like, and being able to do that journey themselves, like just knowing that they are people who are seen and heard and loved and have a part to play in all the different spheres of life. And it's amazing to hear like some of the things that you guys have been doing at Jubilee Plus. Can you tell a story of hope from Jubilee Plus and from some of the work that you guys have been doing?
Well, one thing that comes to mind when I think about hope at Jubilee Plus is that so often people say like kids can be so unkind, don't they? Like that's the thing you hear parents often say when their kids, got in a fight at school or whatever. And we do know that actually, sadly, our human nature, even from the youngest of ages, can be that. But one of the things that has really encouraged me lately is a guy on our team, his daughter, who was 7 at the time, she had been doing our kids curriculum, which is called Overflow. It's like 10 sessions to help 5 to 11-year-olds understand God's heart for people who are vulnerable or different in some way or experiencing poverty. And one day, Will on my team was sitting in the garden with his daughter, and he said to her, which flower in our garden is your favourite flower? And she kind of looked thoughtfully and then said, I don't know, but I know which one Jesus loves the most. And he thought that was really odd. And so he was like baffled, but which one does Jesus love the most? She literally walked over to a flower that had been trodden on and was totally crushed into the mud and the ground. and picked it up and went, "This is the one that Jesus loves the most." And he was like, why are you saying that? And she said, well, I learned in Sunday school that Jesus loves the broken and that Jesus comes towards the broken and those that other people don't appreciate and don't value. And to know that just gives me so much hope, because I think kids get this quicker than adults. Kids so get that, kids who hear about Jesus get it so much quicker than we do. And so I feel like that's hope, but it also is something to cultivate and nourish, isn't it? And nurture. But I think also we run a leadership training program for people who have experienced poverty in the last 5 years or even still in poverty right now, poverty in its broadest form. We run this, we don't call it a leadership training course because the people it's for have told us they wouldn't come on it if it was called that, because they would walk themselves out of leadership. Honestly, the stories on it are amazing. We had a guy who a year earlier was a Class A drug dealer, really a leader for bad. He was clearly a strong leader, but in leading people astray. And he became a Christian. He had a powerful encounter with Jesus. And, a year later, he's on this leadership training course going, I want to help addicts. And he himself wasn't an addict, but he was like, I want to help drug addicts come to know Jesus. We had a guy on it who was a violent gang leader who worked his way up the ranks of gangs by being more and more violent. As he got more progressively violent, he got more leadership opportunity within gangs. And again, like 3 years ago, he had this moment where he met Jesus, and his life has been utterly transformed. And he came on our course saying, I just wanted to prove to my church leaders that I'm not a leader, that I'm not cut out for any sort of leadership in Christian circles. And last week I got a text from him that said, because I came on the formed training course in October last year, I just want to let you know that next week we're launching a recovery service in my church for people suffering with addiction, and I'm going to be leading it. I have the privilege of hearing those sorts of stories up close and personal quite a lot, and it is a joy.
Yeah, so good. And I feel like that hope is so transformational, isn't it? Like knowing that Jesus brings hope to people and can turn lives around in a way that points them to eternity in relationship with him, and then enables them to change things in their lives that they would never have thought been possible. Like, particularly in terms of their identity, I think is incredible. Like, I think one of the things I love about what we get to do at Growing Hope is we offer to pray for children who come to our therapy sessions, and being able to speak hope and value over people, and then see shifts in how they see themselves throughout that period of having that therapy intervention, which often is focusing completely on something different, but just seeing Jesus have that impact in those moments and see people shift in terms of what they think of themselves, I think is incredible. Like it's such a joy, isn't it, when you get to hear those stories and see that change.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about what you think it looks like to do that mixture of holding hope that is unswerving, that is wide-reaching, but in the middle of challenge, when people are walking through poverty or debt or, mental health crises or challenges, and whatever that looks like, trauma. What do you think it looks like to keep holding on to hope in the midst of those challenges?
I think for me personally, it looks like I have to keep looking to Jesus all the time. That's my own, in my life, I don't feel like I can find hope anywhere outside of Jesus. For me, that's been my experience of life, is just that he is the hope bringer. And if I take my eyes off him, it doesn't take long before I lose hope for myself and for other people. But if I keep my eyes fixed on him, which is in many respects, it's hard work, but in other ways, it's just about daily patterns of that, trying to start my day with a bit of stillness, a bit of calm, a bit of time with him and things like that. But one thing I find really helpful that someone said to me in my early days as a Christian is that life is a bit like a tapestry. Like if you look at the back of a tapestry, it looks like a total mess. All the threads are just different colours, but they're all randomly all over the place. But if you go round to the front, it tells a story, and it's a story that makes sense, and it's a picture that makes sense. And trusting that even if my eyes can only see the back of the tapestry, that there is a God who sees the front of the tapestry and is weaving together a story that is for my good and for my flourishing, even when life feels hard and challenging. I find that super helpful. In terms of holding hope for others, especially for those in my life who don't have a relationship with Jesus, who don't have a faith, I think it means keeping encouraging. For me, even if someone doesn't believe in God, if I believe they're made in the image of God, that means I can learn something from every single person that I meet, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done, no matter what their life experience. But also it means that there's value, intrinsic value in each person. So I think, like I've got a teenager that I mentor, and she has no faith at all, and her life outwardly would seem pretty horrendous, to be honest. But by just being a consistent presence in her life over the last 2 years and meeting up with her regularly and just telling her, I like you, you're really funny, you're really switched on about A, B, and C, like there's so much about her that I really like. And it's not just about what I like, it's I'm looking for. How can I encourage you when actually every other voice in your life is telling you you're worthless, you're hopeless, you never amount to anything? And so for me, there's a role for having hope for other people, even when they haven't got it for themselves. I remember going through a really dark time in my own life where I was struggling with grief and anxiety and depression. And two of my friends, independently of each other, kept telling me, I've got hope for you, I've got faith for you. And it kind of at the time was a little bit annoying because I was like, well, I haven't, and I was a bit, again, when I look back, and so much is when we look back, isn't it? I realised those two friends held me when I couldn't hold myself. They kept lifting my head when I was drooping it. And we can bring hope to others by just keep telling them you matter, you have value, and looking to be as specific as possible of, no, this is great about you, and this is wonderful about you, and I really value this about you. And so I think that's how I try and hold hope for people whose lives outwardly or in a worldly sense would look like they might not have any hope in them.
That's amazing. And I think that's such a gift, like that, being able to speak that, in and call that out of people. And when I'm doing accessibility training, I talk to people about that verse in Joshua. It says, be bold and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Because sometimes I think it can take courage for people to choose to be the voice that speaks hope when the whole, everybody else seems to see a different picture of the person in front of us, or seems to judge someone in a particular way. And I guess that's part of what you guys are doing at Jubilee Plus, trying to help people actually, choose to do that. Like, actually, let's put on God's glasses. Like, let's try and see with His perspective these people in front of us.
Definitely. But I do think it's something you can cultivate even if you're not naturally good at it. So I naturally do this. I'm naturally pretty cynical, pretty melancholic, but I, in the last 10 years in particular, have really pressed into wanting, I'm like, who do I want to be? I want to be someone who brings hope and brings life and brings encouragement. So I'm going to become that person. But it's not going against, like, going in with my natural ability. I think it's something that we put on compassion, don't we? We clothe ourselves, the Bible says, in things like compassion and humility. So these are active words. It's not a passive thing. Just if you're good at it, do it. For me, it's about, no, I'm not good at it, so I need to press into it.
Yeah. Practically, I mean, putting you on the spot, what does that look like for you? Do you walk into a room and think, oh, I need to be clothing myself with compassion here? Or are you thinking about particular people you're wanting to do that for? Or how are you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I try to think about it at the beginning of my day, like in that time in the morning when I'm praying, I'm tending to look at what my day ahead looks like and pray into any particular situation. I have like some sort of statements that I used to read them every day. Now I just do it once a month, and I kind of know them off by heart, but they're about who I want to be and how I want to see the world. And it's like training my brain, isn't it, to say these things over and over. And I have the privilege of leading a team at Jubilee Plus, where I think we're trying to cultivate a team where we're merciful to each other, we're kind, we've got each other's backs in our weaknesses. And if we're going to cultivate it as the leader, I've got to do it. So it's partly that each time I go into a meeting, I'm trying to think, how can I be the person I want to be, which is quite a few steps ahead of the person I actually am right now. And I'm trying to think ahead. But also with the teenager I mentioned who I meet up with, each time before I see her, I'm trying to really ask myself, what do I like about her? What do I see in her that reminds me of me when I was her age? And actually that gives me a lot of hope for her, because when I was her age, my life probably looked fairly similar to hers in some ways, different in others. And then I see what God's done in my life, and I think, wow, there's hope for everyone, actually. All the time you're breathing, there's hope that God can intervene, or your circumstances can change, or someone's going to come alongside you and and be a voice of encouragement. And it is interesting. You see people really blossom as you pour encouragement in. Someone once told me that's what encouragement means, pouring courage in. Yeah, that's just, I'm trying to be conscious of it all the time. This isn't my thought, this is someone else's, but we're very specific with our criticism and very vague with our praise. So I'm trying to make sure I'm as specific with any praise as I am with any criticism I'd bring. But I'm a work in progress. I haven't got all this sussed. I'm just trying to grow in it day by day as best I can. And inviting people around me to call me out when I don't do it. And I think that's crucial, is having people you're let speak into your life and go, you were a bit unkind then, or your tone was a bit harsh then, or I think you said the wrong thing, and letting people say that to you. And instead of being defensive, but going, okay, this is an opportunity for me to learn and grow.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, super helpful. Thank you, Natalie. I feel like there's so many practical nuggets there that people can take away as they, put this into action, right? Like, there's no point talking about hope if we're not going to live that hope out in the way that we do our lives. So could you tell us a story of God's faithfulness in your journey of leadership and what you've been doing before we finish up?
It's kind of, I think my whole journey of leadership is a God story, in that I wouldn't have seen myself as a leader. When I became a Christian, I was in a youth group of about 60 to 70 teenagers. And as an adult, I've gone back to my youth leaders at the time and asked them, what were your impressions of me back then? And I said, be honest, I want to hear it uncoated, just give me the unfiltered version. And they said, well, you were a right screwed up mess. And if they'd had to line everyone up in who will still be following Jesus even 30 years later, or who do we see leadership potential in, or who might end up writing books, or whatever category you want to put on it, I'd have been at the bottom of the pile. And I kind of love that, because I love that is what Jesus does. He goes for those who others wouldn't call them leaders. The book of Acts in the Bible, it says that people were astonished at these ordinary, unskilled men or uneducated men who were giving them the gospel, but they were like, how are they talking like that? They've not got the skills. They're not anything special. And, when I was in my 20s, I was told by a leader in church, we don't think you're a leader. And when I was in my 30s, I was told by a church leader, we're not sure if you're a leader. And then in my early 40s, when the founder of Jubilee Plus approached me about taking on the leadership, I said, I'm not a leader. I'm not the right person for the job. And I just think there's something about God's heart is towards those who discount themselves, who disqualify themselves. So for me, my entire journey into leadership, I think, has been God's faithfulness, kind of pushing me. Sometimes I've felt like a little bird on the edge of a cliff, and it's felt like God's got this giant foot that just kicks me off the edge. And what are you doing? What if I don't die? But obviously he knows that I will flap my wings. And so I think there's been God's faithfulness has sometimes involved a bit of just him calling me to do things that I think I could never do that. I don't know how to do it. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, to be honest, I feel like that about most things in life, that I don't know what I'm doing. But he is faithful, and he's looking for a heart that follows him, and he's looking for someone who's committed to him and to the people around them, and actually the rest of it's in his hands. So I think that's kind of been my journey into leadership and as a leader.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I think the power of words is amazing, isn't it? Like, for you to kind of hold on to hope and hold on to God's voice, or God to be able to push you into that journey, like, even when people have said to you, oh no, you're not a leader, or not sure if you're a leader, is amazing. Like, I think, like you're saying, like, that's what God does. Like, he often turns things on their head. And I think being able to know that value that he speaks over each of us and the hope that he brings is amazing. And also being mindful ourselves, like when we're leading stuff, or even just in our conversations, like we were talking about earlier, about like choosing to be the one who pours courage into people. Actually, we can stop ourselves from saying the things that discourage, or like don't speak that hope over people. It's been so good to talk to you. I mean, I feel like there's much more conversation that we could have. Can you tell people, and I love, what could they do next to connect in with you? what opportunities are there?
Yeah, I mean, we're on most social media, just Jubilee Plus, the word plus. Our website is jubilee-plus.org. If people put in my name and Mercy to Google or Amazon or Christian bookstores, they'll find a bunch of books about poverty, class, and the mercy of God. So there's lots of ways people can connect like that. And on our website and on our socials, they can find out about our kids' curriculum, our youth resource, the leadership training course called Formed, which we don't really call it a leadership training course, but all that stuff's out there on socials or on our website.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Natalie. Please do go and see what Natalie and the Jubilee Plus guys are doing, because it is bringing so much hope and sharing Jesus with people. And if you're someone who doesn't know Jesus yet and thinks interesting what has happened in Natalie's life and what these guys are doing at Jubilee Plus and Growing Hope, then ask God to speak to you, or find a church near you and ask them about Jesus, because he is the one who brings hope. And we would love to tell you more about that and share more about that with you. But thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next podcast.
You have been listening to Holding Hope, a podcast series from Growing Hope. Growing Hope is a charity providing free therapy for children with additional needs and their families in partnership with local churches. If you would like to give £10 today to Growing Hope, just message Growing Hope, all one word, to 70490. Please visit growinghope.org.uk for other ways to support the work.